Hello and welcome to Ticket Manager's All Access interview series, engaging leaders from across the sports marketing spectrum to identify and explore critical issues in the business of sports, entertainment, sponsorship, activation, ticketing, hospitality, and even more. I'm your host, Jim Andrews. Joining me on this episode is Bettina Cornwell, Head of the Department of Marketing and the Philip H. Knight Chair and Professor of Marketing at the Lundquist College of Business at the University of Oregon. All of that is to say that, at least in my mind, and I know in many others, Bettina is really the unquestioned leading academic researcher in the field of sponsorship. She's literally written the book on sponsorship, and it's a real privilege and honor to have her join the podcast. Welcome, Bettina.
Thank you, Jim. What a lovely introduction. I wish I could have you with me everywhere.
Bettina, one of the things I'd like to start off with is just, I think it's very interesting and have always appreciated when I've been able to talk to academics, people who study sponsorship and really know it inside and out. I'm wondering how you even got started and how you chose this as your field of study within marketing.
Early on, I was already studying communications and miscommunications in advertising, and I went to a tennis event, and the VP North America for Volvo said, "Yeah, wow, we're really interested in measuring more about what we're doing in sponsoring." They were filling cars with tennis balls and having people guess how many tennis balls were in the car and all kinds of things. I thought, yeah, I'd like to know how this is working too.
Excellent. Yeah, Volvo was the big sponsor of the ATP Tour back in the day. So I'd almost forgotten that. It's been so many years.
Yeah.
I'd love to start off with a question that you and I have known each other for a while. We've discussed this in different ways over the years, and that is for all of the sports marketing sponsorship practitioners out there, the sponsors, the rights holders, the agencies that all are all of them who listen to this podcast, at least, they have so much on their plates, and they have their own kind of market research, fan analytics that they're collecting within their own organizations and sharing hopefully with their partners. Essentially, why should those folks pay attention to the research that you and your other colleagues in academia are doing?
If we think about academics, they are a curious lot in the sense that they are, in part of their job description, they're asked to do research on topics of interest to them and topics that are relevant to business. And they, ask questions, they make observations, and they launch research. Oftentimes it's unfunded. And they produce research articles that are at times, I will admit, a bit of a slog to read. But in most instances, they're unbiased third-party kind of contributors to research. So that's nice. And you can learn about research findings early and implement them and be a first mover, or at least have a new strategy perspective. And the truth of the matter is that eventually academic research gets into mainstream business, and then it's cut off, the roots are cut off, and it's business acumen then, the funnel model and all of its reincarnations throughout the years is from a 60s Lavage and Steiner paper. It's ancient. I mean, when it's all decked out in colors, it looks like it's brand new.
Right.
And brand equity is an academic construct that was developed by Aker. And so, they eventually get into the business world. But if you want to be ahead of the game, you might want to learn about those sorts of things early on.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. First mover advantage, always key in business. Do you think that, practically speaking, is there a way to, kind of make that connection? Because as you say, it can sometimes be there could be fascinating insights, but maybe they're buried in a paper that was published in a journal that is not going to be on the radar screen of the folks in the field. So do you see a better way to kind of forge those connections between, what's being done on the academic side and the practitioners, kind of distill those nuggets of really, really key information that in a way that could be useful?
this is where the academics fall short in translating or distilling their findings for easy to digest pieces, right? I mean, just we don't have in the academic world as much, as much of a reward for translation pieces.
Mm.
So the end of the story is that original academic article, and there's some pressure to do more of that, and some people do. But the key takeaways and to write that extra, paper that goes somewhere into quick access or even on online, it takes that extra effort, and that's not part of what your original mission is.
Sure.
Now, that said, I am totally keen to build bridges, and I think we should do more of that. I mean, this conversation today is one of those possibilities, right?
Absolutely.
And so, the Marketing Science Institute, which you may be familiar with, they do something where they ask managers, industry, what are the top things that you would like to see in terms of research? And those guide a lot of research papers that are then utilized by top companies that are in the Marketing Science Institute, the NSI list.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think we probably could be doing something like that. So what is it that you want to know? And what is it that keeps you up at night? And tell the academics, and they might work on it.
Well, as you said, I mean, we have an opportunity right here to kind of start to build the bridge, as you mentioned. So, why don't we start with? I'd be interested in hearing just what you've been working on recently. So, if you can share some of the highlights from some of your latest projects, that would be great.
Let's see. Let's start with a broad-based study. So, this is work with one of my previous PhD students, Dr. Kwan, and we finished a meta-analytic review. And if we could break that down in a minute.
It sounds impressive.
Yeah. It is a study of studies. And so the set of studies we were considering, event studies on sport sponsorship announcements, and do those announcements by firms that they're going to spend a lot of money on sports sponsorship, do they influence their stock price?
Oh, interesting.
So then we looked across the studies that had been conducted, and we were able to find 34. And the process is then not just to review them or to summarize them, but to actually, in the meta-analytics sense, go back and take their findings statistically as new research for this new paper.
Okay.
That gives you a huge pool that you wouldn't have had in a single paper.
Right.
So paper on Olympics, or paper on, NFL, or paper on pro sports some way. So all of those coming together to one big study. And so what this research typically does, this event study, it says, okay, here's an event. Bing, they announce that they're sponsoring, their shirt sponsor in this space. And does that influence stock price? And so that in almost all of the studies, you'll see a pre-window. Did it leak? A day of window, and then a follow-on window.
Right.
And so there were mixed findings across the 34 studies. Yeah, sometimes it really seemed to be a super important factor, positive returns, and some instances not so much, and even a few negative. But with our meta-analysis, we were able to show that actually the statistically significant positive impact on the stock market from these happened in the pre-window. So just before the announcement, the stock price starts to go up. And so you can imagine you have a lot of people involved in that decision. It's not like an event study that considers a CEO died suddenly.
Right.
That probably wasn't in the mix. But this one says, well, no, we've got a lot of people involved in this decision. Probably people started to learn about it, and the stock price starts to go up. That this is indicating this is a good investment for this firm. So basically kind of showing that, sponsorship works.
That's the bottom line. We like it when studies come out and show that, of course. But we know that's it's also would be good to have information the other way, right? That would inform us that maybe
the case. Yeah, totally.
Do something a little bit different. But is there you obviously you are very familiar with all kinds of activities that brands are doing. You do such an excellent job and commenting on that on LinkedIn and things like that. Do you see, are there some sponsorships or some practice that you see out there that kind of you look at and say, knowing what I know after researching sponsorship for so many years, I'm surprised maybe that that this is still happening or something like that. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. My top candidate there would be the role of fit or
Mm,
match or congruence in sponsorship. And admittedly, early studies showed that if you match, then it goes better for you. You have better outcomes. People remember it. But these days, with so much sponsorship happening,
mm.
if you match and you fit well with that event, so do all your competitors. And it's confusing. And there's
Right.
so many sponsors, so many different things, right?
Hmm.
And if you're involved in the sport ecosystem, you're just going to be awash with brands in your mind. So you really need to have something more going on than just fit and match. And besides, we have a huge number now of B2B brands and different kinds of brands that are engaged in sponsorship for different reasons. We need to think about how they fit and match.
Right.
But that's not the construct of interest. In my opinion, and we have shown empirically, it's really about authenticity.
Mm.
So with another previous PhD student, Dr. Charlton, we considered a fit measure compared to an authenticity measure. And we have a long scale, 16 items, and a short scale, 4 items. And we can show that actually it's a better measure of compatibility between a sponsor brand and a property.
Yeah.
It really does work because, what people want is a genuine relationship.
Mm.
They don't want advertising stuck on that hasn't got any relationship to this team or this event, and they want to know, how do you have a relationship? What is your history together? What is the meaning that you share?
I hear you, and it makes sense, right? Because we always talked about sponsors needing to kind of avoid clutter, as you say. You can go back to the tennis example, right? How many luxury automobiles are still involved in tennis, and we understand why. But at some point, does it make sense for one of them to break out of the pack and do something different? I'm curious if there's a simple way to talk about the authenticity factors, because I think that's really it makes so much sense to me. But how does, especially if it is incongruent, right? If the consumer doesn't automatically kind of see the connection, are there specific steps that sponsors can take to be authentic, I guess?
Well, actually, yes, authenticity will change over time.
Mm.
And insurance companies, they don't really match and fit, but when they've been working with a group for so long, they become part of that ecosystem. And if they communicate about their values, shared values, if they communicate about how the history of the brands working together has gone and things like that, they can develop that authenticity.
Well, and that kind of again bolsters something that I don't know if there's research that backs this up, but kind of the conventional wisdom is that it takes a while to kind of become successful at sponsorship, to start earning a return on sponsorship. Very hard to do kind of out of the gate, because people have to get familiar with it and comfortable with it. So it sounds like that's backing up something that we have always kind of maybe assumed to be true in the business, but you're putting some data behind that.
Absolutely. And moreover, if you're taking over from a direct competitor, other academic research shows that they are going to be remembered for not only the first 6 months or year, but for a very long time. And if they've developed what I call shared brand equity, then you have to work very hard to be unique. And the luxury autos and tennis example, you can't just put your symbol in the net and,
Right.
and rebadge. It just doesn't work. So it is, especially when you go up against a direct competitor that you've taken over a property from someone that matches and fits as well as you do, you need to have some authentic kind of link that you articulate.
Are there any other examples where kind of the research has kind of busted a myth?
I do think that industry either doesn't want to hear it or isn't giving adequate weight to the fact that relationships established persist. And if you aren't directly establishing new linkages in the mind, you're advertising for your competitor. Even across categories, you'll see what we call, from an academic perspective in cognitive psychology, spontaneous recovery of the previous sponsor for years.
Mm.
And it depends on, sort of what you've done, how authentic you've been, what kind of activations you've utilized, whether you overcome their established shared brand equity and build your own shared equity with that property.
Yeah.
And that keeps happening, and people say, it didn't turn out as well this first year as we expected. And that's because you've been working for your competitor for a year, probably.
That's a really big point, I think, because we know that sponsorships turn over. There are some examples. It was just my last podcast interview was with IBM, and they were talking about their relationships with the Masters and U.S. Open and Wimbledon, which go back decades. But those are few and far between. We're used to churn in this business, so that's a really important consideration then to know that, hey, if I'm coming in as a new sponsor with a property that's been around for a while and has had other sponsors, I'm going to have to basically put the work in to to start getting people to accept me, I guess is one way to put it.
Especially if that previous sponsor was there for 6, 8, 10 years.
You're very well known, I think, for spotting trends and synthesizing different actions into kind of a collective narrative of what's happening in sponsorship. What other things are you kind of paying attention to these days? It's the one thing about sponsorship to me, and again, you and I have been doing this for a while, is it never gets old, right? There's always something new to look at, whether it's the introduction of technology or just new ways of thinking about things. But are there certain issues, I guess, topics that we should all be keeping an eye on when we talk about the intersection of brands and properties?
So I believe that trends actually can vary quite a bit country to country. The one overarching trend that we can certainly see is the ascendance of women's sports and women in sport, exemplified by our own National Women's Soccer League. Mm-hmm. And I made a statement in one of my predictions that I posted, on LinkedIn a few years ago. Invest now in soccer. You'll be happy in 5 years or something like that. And really, it's been amazing.
Yeah.
But if you dig a little deeper, that trend is really part of an overarching trend that is present worldwide. And that is emphasis on diversity, equity, inclusion, corporate social responsibility. In fact, a recent Nielsen report discusses that managers are keen to emphasize DEI, environmental protection, CER across the globe. Mm-hmm. So it's not just a US phenomenon, it's everywhere. And one of the ways that manifests is in the support of women's sports, in the pay equality, and all of the things we already know.
Wow.
So the ascendance of women's sport is an obvious one. Mm-hmm. But it's backed by an enormous trend.
And that idea, the broader picture too, of the focus on DE&I and in general, just kind of building purpose into partnerships. I last week just hosted a sponsor summit for a major marathon, and literally, I would say 80% of the conversation that we had over this half-day session of conversations, panel discussions, was just about that. And I can think back, even 10, 15 years ago, we would have been talking about, what's going to happen on the course on marathon day, who's going to do, fun promotions to get the participants involved and things like that. And sure, that's going to be a part of an event like that. But literally the conversation was all about how can we build purpose into these partnerships? How can we use a marathon to talk about issues like sustainability, DE&I, all of those kinds of things. So yeah, that has really, again, I think you and I have always seen linkages between sports and causes, over the decades, but now, it's just kind of off the charts in terms of how much that activity has really risen to the top.
And the way in which it's risen, I think, is very important in that women in sport, it used to be sort of this little add-on to show that you were doing a good thing. But now it's becoming the central story in a very mature and a more appealing way, that they are being recognized as the athletes they are and being given better conditions which they deserve.
Virginia, this has been fascinating. I always learn so much when I talk to you. And before I let you know, is there any other, since we have the platform to share all of the good stuff that anything else we should let either brands or properties know from what you're seeing and researching?
A trend you certainly see in UK and Central Europe and continental Europe is frustration with international sponsors. And some recent discussion and some of our recent evidence from the UK was really, people are just almost desperate for local sponsors to step in, and frustrated with everything being sold internationally, all the shirt sponsorships that go abroad and things like that. And that sort of relates to work that we did not so long ago with colleagues from Germany, Dr. Vossert-Schläger and Bachhaus. And in that research, we found that international sponsors are oftentimes seen as more calculative. Mm-hmm. So if they want to come into a country and sponsor from abroad in a country, how do you go about that? By building authenticity, right? Instead of just coming in appearing to be all about advertising. Mm. And the other trend that we look at, again, at the surface of the trend, at least for me, is excitement around technology and virtual, reality and augmented reality and the metaverse. And that is so exciting and fun in terms of activation. But the true, in my opinion, technological innovation permeating sponsorship right now is AI and measurement. Measuring and coming closer to a real understanding of the value of sponsorship for brands. And, you used to have advertising equivalency, and then you had advertising equivalency with clear and in focus. And now you have advertising equivalency with a quality measure that is then discounted in the algorithm that really gets you close to what you're buying.
Yeah.
And we've not been there in the same way. So there's a lot in technology and innovation and a lot of fun stuff that gets attention of the media, but the behind the scenes of measurement is really transforming. Well,
yes, and as you and I know, that's been an uphill battle to kind of figure out measurement, and everybody's taken a different approach to it, and some more successfully than others. But obviously, that's a great point, that the technology can really enable some of those things that we just could never have done manually in the past. So awesome. Bettina, again, I can't thank you enough for spending some time with us and sharing your insights. And I will continue to look for opportunities to connect all of the great stuff that you and your colleagues are doing with the folks in the industry, because I think it's really important, as the examples that you've talked about today clearly show. So we'll do this again in some format, somewhere, somehow.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to build more bridges. It's just exactly what both sides need.
Excellent. Well, on behalf of everyone at Ticketmanager, thank all of you for watching and listening. And please join us again for the next episode in the All Access interview series.